We have another question. This is from Twitter. Let me give you the context first. It's a person who listened to our series where we discussed each of the 8 modules of our program. So we had a podcast where we did little 20-minute segments, and we discussed each of the 8. And so one of them was talking about maturity. And so this person's question is a response to that, having heard all of those. He said, I'm thinking it would be useful for you to address the reality that some people are not able to have children. This is because we discussed that's, having a child in your life is sort of the number one natural way that people, grow to maturity quickly and without even really any conscious effort. So it'd be useful for you to discuss the reality that some people are not able to have children and or can afford them in today's world. Otherwise, some of your content emphasis on maturity / purpose seems biased and incomplete. Kids aren't for everyone. Thoughts? And then he says, people can have completely meaningful and purposeful lives without children entering the picture. Many people have kids precisely because of a cultural bias, then get overwhelmed, then they get addicted to escape responsibilities they never felt suited for, or they feel like failures without kids. So I guess the question is, can't you find maturity without kids? And then there's a lot of...
And what's your answer to that?
A lot you might want to respond to. Well, yeah, of course. Of course. I mean,
that goes to that. We're not in the business. Neither of my daughters has children, but their brother has kids, and we're all, we celebrate Hanukkah with my son's children. But if you go back to Erik Erikson, he had 8 stages of life, and the last stage is generativity. It isn't parenthood. It's like, what mark have you made on the universe that's left some kind of an inkling of something positive?
Like legacy.
And one answer to that, of course, is young people. And you can be generative with young people by having nieces. A lot of people I know who don't have children, including my 2 daughters, don't have children. They have, and I'm not going to rule them out, they have nieces and nephews. They produce positive works that'll continue after them. They try to contribute to their environments and to society by promoting pro-social values. I mean, both of my daughters, one's in education psychology and one's in writing. They always, they'll never participate in spreading a negative value. So they're generating positivity. When my one daughter was kind of with a man, a fairly well-known actor who was extremely negative towards the waitress, my daughter wrote a piece saying, the guy's kind of a jerk. She's not going to allow negative values to be spread out there as though she tolerates or accepts them. So those are examples of generativity. And what can I tell you? Some of the people who were closest to me, my children, don't have children.
Right.
So I can hardly rule out people without children as being contributing members of society.
I think an overarching message that we could give people here is that when you're thinking about our content, even though it should be clear in the writing, we're not prescribing anything. There's like a basic element. One of the fundamentals is you have to live a good life. You kind of have to want to live life instead of checking out from it. Beyond that, these are all just, our best appraisal of good lives that have been lived so far and how you might channel it. So we're never giving a rule or saying that, you can or can't do something, or you should or shouldn't do something, but that you might want to gravitate toward one thing or another. And historically, other people have found success, happiness by doing whatever the example is.
You always want to explore people's parenting situation. That's sort of a first question. I think we're a little bit in line with Buddhism. I mean, Christianity lays down some heavy values, worshiping God and what would Jesus say. Buddhism is a little bit more like follow your own star. And I think that's the way we go. But we are life affirming. It is hard for us to double back. If we say addiction, as you point out, is an escape from life because you fear it or find it primarily negative. And so what we're saying is that's not even people who've had some extremely negative experiences. Aaron Ferguson spent a lot of his early life in a cult and in prison. We don't rule anybody out. Well, you have to pay your dues as debt to society. We're not going to pardon people like Trump did, but we're going to say, well, okay, whatever you did in prison, if they've let you out, or even if they haven't let you out, if you're ready to pursue a positive contributory thing, if you're ready to embrace life and to look for something that you want to embark on in life, we can do this thing. If somebody wants to tell you they hate life and they hate their own life, that's a therapy of a different sort usually. And we can work with people on that, but we're not going to accept that. We're not going to sit there and say, well, okay, we're not going to encourage. I don't know, we don't have a position on voluntary suicide, but we're not going to participate in encouraging people to have that kind of an outlook.
I won't go on about this, but there's a lady that I interviewed. Her name's Tessie Castillo. Are you familiar with her? She writes for Filter. She writes for a few outlets, but she wrote a book recently about death row inmates. She was there giving journalism classes to them. And while she was speaking with them, she was thinking like, okay, maybe I can give these people something not to, be suicidal over. And she found that so many of them wanted to make an impact somehow on the more than anybody she's ever met. It's like, these are people who are recognized they have bad moral luck or they're there for whatever reason. And they have really good aspects about them as people, despite some of the heinous things that they may have done. And so anyway, I encourage people to check out. Her book is Crimson Letters, and I did a podcast with her. So you should check it out because it's a really good way to think about, all right, if anybody shouldn't be able to have values and then turn their lives around, it should be death row inmates. But yet you find that there's a lot of human aspects and humans who want to do good in the world, even if they're in those situations.
They almost are more eager to find that.
Yeah.
I mean, human beings do seem to have, like plants, a life-affirming aspect to them. And another thing that you and I have said is, we don't encourage anybody to be addicted or to go to prison. But on the other hand, we recognize a certain existential strength or insight that people get from, a woman's just written a book. Is it Wilderness or Darkness, where she had a bad patch of things. Her husband got really ill, and bad things happen to people all the time. And she talked about enduring it and getting beyond that. In a way, we don't encourage people to have negative experiences. We certainly don't encourage them to be addicted or to commit crimes. But in a way, it broadens your palate. It makes you aware of how bad things can be for people. Like that woman did, the writer that you described. Is her name Tessa, did you say?
Tessie.
She discovered goodness in even people who've had the worst experiences, which shows how they've broadened their palates, and she broadened their palate from speaking to them. It's the same with The Good Place. It's if somebody had a completely positive, homogenized life, how interesting could that be? Or how interesting could we find them? They wouldn't have any idea about what the rest of us have dealt with and to some extent still deal with.
In fact, I'm going to link to, I interviewed one of the people who was on death row. So I'm going to link to that segment of the interview in the show notes.